Are you with us, Claude?
Hi, guys.
Hello,
Hey,
hello,
how you
Claude.
doing?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
Once again,
Yeah.
Claude, you followed after Zahir, actually.
Yeah, I guess
Tradition.
I just finished work for the week, so I guess it's pretty much how it times out usually. So, uh, what a week, eh? Another
Well,
good night.
indeed.
Gets better and better,
Wow.
Yeah.
or worse and worse, whichever way you want to look at it.
I was thinking of something yesterday I wanted to mention to you guys, and I was listening to Lavrov's interview with the Russian media this week. I think Alexander made a couple really cool uh, YouTube videos about it, and I was trying to connect the dots. Who's he talking to? What's he talking about? And so there was especially a line where he said where uh, UK was pressuring European EU countries to cut ties with Russia while they were, you know, underhandedly trying to create back channels and so forth. And all I could think of was the Russians know that they're gonna the Germans have told the Russians that they won't be allowed to bring on Nord Stream online. They know by now because German. This is not good for Germany. It really isn't. I'm sure that's not what they wanted. And I think they're stuck. They're stuck between the U.S. and the U.K. and the French and everybody pressuring them to lock this thing down. And the Russians obviously know by now, because if you were the Germans, you would let the Russians know ahead of time what's going on, because the last thing you would want to do is catch them off guard, and then you have no diplomatic channels left, right?
Yeah.
And it's you remember when Obama was caught spying on Merkel and her government? It's the Americans have never trusted the Germans with the Russians, and I don't know where this goes, because I was going to ask. I heard on the show today. We hear everything on this show, which is awesome. But it's $11 billion investment by the Russians for Nord Stream 2. So there's no way they can take this line down. If this happens, my guess is the Russians are just going to completely cut off Europe from its gas, and China will absorb the difference. Just because that's how these two countries are working together now. Not that they need it, but they can afford to absorb those lost sales that Russia, at least for a while, anyways. And then it's really interesting to see where it goes after that.
Well, yes, I mean, $11 billion is a huge amount of money, but bear in mind that it's less than with the present state of the oil market. Russia increased its financial reserves by just over the course of 1 week. So it's a lot of money in the round. It would be, big court cases. If Germany pulls out of Nord Stream 2, you can imagine a vast flurry of court cases that will happen like night follows day. The Russians will be extremely angry because they weren't minded. It wasn't their idea to build Nord Stream 2.
No, it was the Germans.
It was the Germans came along, and Merkel herself, and they talked them into doing it at a time when the Russians had decided not to build more pipelines to Europe because of the political problems.
There was a lot of coaxing. I remember there was a lot of coaxing involved by the Germans about energy security and all that stuff. And it took 3 or 4 long, negotiations with the Russians to get this going. So that's why I say Germany looks really bad. Merkel looks really bad if she's twisted into interrupting Nord Stream or not letting it, because it's basically built. So you're basically telling the Russians, okay, you spent the money, you built it, now because you're not nice with Navalny or whatever the flavor of the week is, you see a very intense Lavrov Lavrov was on a mission in that interview. Putin has been on a mission the last month or so. There's something really ugly brewing here.
Oh, I entirely agree with that. I mean, by the way, I should say on my own channel, I've done two separate videos on that interview that Lavrov gave. One which is looking at, an overview of it. One specifically on that a very remarkable comment that he made about the fact that the British at one and the same time are telling other European countries to scale down their relations with Russia, whilst at the same time telling the Russians that that Britain wants to increase its contacts with Russia. And I said that, that the point that you made, that there's always nervousness both in Washington and London about the Germans and the Russians getting too close. That is absolutely true, and that may very well be a part of it all. There's a famous comment made by the first ever Secretary General of NATO, who was British, Lord Ismay, in which he said that the point of NATO was to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. And you can understand from a British point of view how that might work. How if you're thinking of it from the perspective of a British establishment figure, this is the kind of policy the British want to play. Don't get a situation where the Germans and the Russians are working too closely with each other. But as I also said in that program, if the British are playing that very complicated game, and it's important to stress, we only have Lavrov's words that they are. I mean, he might have just been mischievous when he said it, but assuming that is true, assuming the British are reaching out to the Russians at the same time as they're telling everybody else to scale down their contacts with the Russians, then it's a very dangerous game the British are playing. And to come back to your original question, maybe that interview that Lavrov gave was intended to alert the other Europeans, and especially the Germans, to what is going on. That may have been one purpose. Maybe it was also to alert the British to the fact that the Russians know exactly what the British are up to. And the interview overall was clearly, in large measure, addressed to the United States and to Britain and to the Western powers. It was basically saying Russia has its red lines. Russia's not going to be intimidated. Russia is not going to be pressured. We're going to stick to our positions. We don't fear your sanctions. We have decided that your threats of war in Ukraine are all bluff. That word was actually used over the course of that interview, and that was really the purpose of it all. Also, of course, it was partly intended to keep Russians informed. By the way, the Russian population takes a great interest in Russian foreign policy, perhaps more than is the case in some Western countries.
Well, they know the history, so they know how potentially dangerous things can get, and how quickly things can fall apart. But if I was really fascinated by Lavrov's, I've always been a fan of his as a statesman, and it's the first time I saw him on the verge of losing his composure. If you watch the interview again, you'll see how he advances his upper body. He's hot under the collar. He's got a hard time keeping it in check. He was angry.
Oh, of course.
There was, and the more he talked, the more he was winding himself up. And I've never seen him like that before.
No, I know. I agree. I completely agree. I have never known the Russians to be as angry as they are at the moment. I mean, they've always been very composed and very contained. But over the last few months, Lavrov has been giving interview after interview in which he's been making his feelings absolutely clear. And of course, we had that extraordinary speech from Putin in which he talked about red lines and actually gave a warning about Russia taking asymmetrical action if those red lines were crossed. And of course, a warning can be interpreted also as a threat. So the Russians are very, very angry. I think the Navalny affair has played a big role in that. I think they were deeply, deeply angered that a project of the scale of Nord Stream 2 could be put in jeopardy by an episode which I think they see as frankly farcical. I think they're also very angry by the attempts to interfere and meddle in their internal affairs, which is what the Navalny affair was all about. But I think also, and I do get this sense that a very, very big thing happened in the first half of this year, the first quarter of this year. I think all those movements of troops and fleets and plots of coups in Belarus are things that we only know about on the surface. I think probably lots more things were going on.
Well,
he
touched on this.
Yeah.
If you remember in the conversation, he said how the Russians had talked about, Putin had spoken with Biden, and they had pulled their troops back. He kind of associated the conversation with the Russians agreeing to, you know, pull some troops back off the border to calm things down. And he says the thanks we got for that was more propaganda and calling us that, you know, cowards and we're backing down and that kind of stuff. You know, he's really showing out. He's giving a lot of background there. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the other thing. It was a very the amount of information he was giving away about what goes on in discussions is really quite extraordinary. Again, I've never seen anything like that happen before.
No.
But I mean, he was talking quite openly about some of the things that are said in private discussions, and his talk about the Europeans, the Germans, and the French was astonishing, actually, exposing how weak they were in negotiations and how they are and how shamefaced they are as they admit repeatedly that they can't fulfill promises that they've made. But it was all very, very interesting, and I do think, as I said, something very big happened this year. I think that, as I said, I suspect that with the new administration, some people in Washington and London and Brussels thought that this was the moment to make a big push. It all unraveled in all kinds of ways, and it's left the Russians very angry. I should say that yesterday I was following a very, very interesting discussion that Ray McGovern, who was, of course, you know, he's the chair of VIPS, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, had with a very, very knowledgeable Russian academic called Vladimir Kozin. Now, Kozin is an interesting man because he teaches, amongst other places, at the Russian General Staff Academy, and he's got a lot of contacts with the senior military people. And he also said that we got to a very dangerous point this April. And, you know, that was something I'd already suspected. But you had a person who, from a Russian side, would probably know. And he actually said that in that discussion. So, again, I wonder what the whole story is. One day, 50, 100 years from now, we'll probably know the answer. But something very big happened, I believe, in the first half of this year, the first couple of months of this year.
Yeah, and it involves the United States and a few others.
Absolutely.
And I feel for this Zelensky character. He must miss the comedy. He must miss the comedy clubs, but he's stuck in a really bad spot right now because you can see the Americans manipulating him, and he's got the Minsk Accord that the Europeans are enforcing on him, and then he's got the Americans pressuring him to ignore it and break it. And where does this guy go? I mean, he's got all, and we know these neo-Nazi militias in Kiev. Anybody who's followed the story from the beginning, those are actually real. So it's true that he has this domestic issue that he's got to deal with at the same time. So that's an unmanageable.
Absolutely. By the way, Lavrov said some appalling things about Zelensky. He clearly considers him a total clown, and he even said that he'd watched with amusement Zelensky's TV role, Servant of the People, and that perhaps Zelensky should rediscover that earlier persona of himself.
Well, I mean,
about as scathing as you could get, but there we go.
Asking Putin to meet him in the Donbass was an insane. It was completely insane.
Well, now it's the Vatican, apparently.
Okay. Well,
that's Zelensky's latest idea, is that they meet in the Vatican. So there you go.
gentlemen, have a great weekend as usual.
Thank you, Claude.
Take care,
Bye.
Claude. Take
Bye,
care.
Alex.
Bye-bye. Take care.